Alright, 6.6 is the last lesson of the chapter. It's a very brief lesson here. All it's going to do is take the graphing skills that you should have been working on and put it together into graphing systems. We do know how to graph the following equations, inequalities separately. Do not put this on your notes if you have it because it comes into play later, but just looking at each one separately is what we're doing. Remember that this 4 tells you to go up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and put your dot. The negative 2/3 tells us to go down 2 over 3 and put our dot. That would be considered a closed circle, so it means it is a closed line, which for us is a solid line going all the way through that. And then we're supposed to test 0, 0, getting 0 greater than or equal to 0 plus 4, because remember, everything that has a variable turns into 0. Simplifying that into 0 is greater than or equal to 4, which we know to be false. And because that is false, that means that we will shade on the other side above that line. Okay? Again, that's slope-intercept form. You also need to make sure you're ready for standard form. In standard form, remember the first thing you do is ignore the y, bringing down 2x equals 6, meaning that x equals 3, which puts me there. Remember, you then ignore the x, bringing down negative 3y equals 6, which means that y is negative 2, which puts me there. That would be an open circle, so we graph an open line or a dashed line through this. And again, testing 0, 0, we end up with 0 minus 0 less than 6, 0 less than 6, which we know to be true. And because that is true, you stay there and go towards that point, getting that graph. Alright, so again, this is stuff that you should have learned in 6.5 and in all the work with chapter 5. But the question is, what if we needed to graph a system of inequalities? That makes it a little bit different. So the essential question for the day is, how do you determine the proper section to shade if you have a system of inequalities? Well, whenever a system of inequalities is graphed, there is at least 4 sections to choose from. The actual section is an overlap of the 2 shaded sections, so let's just look at those graphs from before and put them into one system. So in this case, you actually have 2 inequalities that need to be graphed. So this is where you want to write down everything that I wrote and make sure you organize it, because these are 2 separate graphs that you have to work with. And again, make sure you stay with me, especially on the shading, because my shading is going to be different. Again, that 4 tells us to go up 4. Negative 2/3 tells us to go down 2 over 3. Solid line going through those 2. Same thing we did before. Testing 0, 0 is where we got our 0 greater than or equal to 0 plus 4, which we knew to be false. Now here's the thing about that false statement. Because it's false, we do go up top, but because we're going to shade 2 things, we don't want to actually shade it yet. We want to draw some semi-perpendicular lines away from that on the proper side so we can visually see what side we are shading on that line. Then you're going to go to your second graph. Again, 2x equals 6 means that x is 3, so we put a dot there. Negative 3y equals 6 means that y is negative 2, put our dot there. Open circle, open line, so again, draw your dashed line through that part. And testing 0, 0 in this case, so ignore that f. But testing 0, 0 for this line, we get 0 minus 0 less than 6, which we learn to be true. And because it's true, now we draw a series of semi-perpendicular lines in the other area. And what we are looking for is the area where they overlap. As it says up here, it's the overlap of the sections. Notice this section down here at the bottom of that, because what you have is a line doing this. So you have a top, bottom, left, and right section. The bottom section has nothing at all. This section has lines, but not 2 sets. That section has lines, but not 2 sets. The only section that has overlapping lines is here at the top. And that is how you want to shade whenever you graph a system of equations. Now again, today is not a new section really, it's just a matter of putting this all together. If you have an issue with today, it should not be with the just make sure your issue is with the shading, not with the graphing. If you don't know how to graph, that's the reason why you can't do systems. It's really what holds a lot of people back. But just make sure that your graphing is where it needs to be before you start blaming it on the shading, because as long as you understand how to shade, you should be okay. Organization is the key to graphing a system. Again, be sure not to shade heavily until you know exactly where you are. You don't have to, this says you will have to, but you don't have to understand graphing to do today's work in terms of the 6.6 actual homework, because all you really have to do is what I'm about to show you on a few homework examples, where the graph is already there. We just want to see what you are going to do in terms of shading. So again, test is coming up soon, so if you don't know how to graph, make sure you get as much assistance as you can get as soon as you can get it, because this is important here. What you're going to see on a homework is a picture, 3 different types, where both graphs cross below the x-axis, below the x-axis. You're going to see a couple graphs where the one's below and one is above, and you're going to see a couple graphs where both of them are above. So they're all different types that you're going to see. Again, the lines will be graphed. Only thing I'm going to say is that the solid line is false, and what I mean is that you tested 0, 0 and found out that the solid line was false. And so what you're going to do, because it's false, is go to the solid line. False up here means you're going to go to the bottom. So just for sake of practice, you're going to do that. And then it's going to give you a condition for the dashed line, which in this case is also false, which means we are going to stay on this side of the dashed line. And again, you are looking for the overlap, and in this case the overlap is down here. In terms of the Math XL, I'm giving you a word to type in where you either type in top, bottom, left, or right, depending on where you would shade. I recommend that you actually copy the picture down to the best of your ability and actually shade it, because you have to work on your shading to get better at shading. It's just common sense. But that's what we're doing there. Looking at the second one, again, it's going to be another picture, and they'll just have different combinations of false versus true. If the solid line is false, that means, again, for the solid line, we jump over and shade this side. If the dashed line is true, that means we go towards this part, so it'll be here. And again, looking for your overlap. It's not on the left, it's not on the right, it's not on the top, it is on the bottom. As my pen is obviously dying right now, it's always good to do it in the middle of the video. Just turn it to red. I hope that shows up. And then on the third one, and this one here, again, testing 0, 0, your solid line is true, and because it's true, that means we should be on the bottom part. The dashed line is false, which means that we want for the dashed line to be on this side. And in this case, our overlapping section is here on the right. I hope that shows up on the video. Okay, I think it does decently enough. Sorry about that. Didn't know my pen was going to die. But bottom line is this. On your mastery check for 6.6, you do need to make sure that you put your graphs on paper. Make sure you do that, because looking at your quizzes, it's all that a lot of you still have not gotten the graphing skill down. So make sure that goes on paper, or you don't get credit for anything that has to do with 6.4. Even if you finish it, a 0 goes in the book. I need that paper of graphs. Please make sure you turn them in when you finish. And then other than that, you're going to spend the rest of the time just pretty much getting ready for the test. So good luck, and again, make sure you get assistance. Make sure you work together as well as you can.